Alright, hello everyone again. We are up to part 4 now of our series. We are going to talk today about drafting for curve. This is one of the topics that's very dependent on judgment, and I'm not going to have as many specific examples as I have for other videos, and it's because there really isn't any that I want to really talk about, because the only really way to talk about curve is to go through an arena draft, and I'm not going to do that at the moment because we haven't talked about everything yet. We haven't talked about spells, and we haven't talked about any of the different classes and their strengths and weaknesses. So we're going to be getting into those in some later videos, but for now, just want to talk about curve. We'll talk about curve some more later as well, especially once we get into the actual drafting stage. And once again, the annotation for the playlist will be on your screen. So curve is the most important part of the arena draft. Sure, having good minions is also important, and we've talked about that consistently for the past 3 videos, but in this video, and this is something that has no clearly defined area. It's very subjective, and it's very dependent on everything that kind of occurs in the case of your arena draft. The point that I put up on the screen is that during the last 10 cards you have started to realize what your arena deck is starting to shape like, and you can pick cards that are maybe of lesser value that are more important to suit your curve. And an example I could think of is, say you have Boulder Fist Ogre as an option, but you're lacking on 2-drops. You may pick a cruddy like River Crocolisk or a Bloodfin Raptor, because it's better to. You have no cards to really play on turn 2, and if you need to play cards on turn 2, so you pick the Bloodfin Raptor, even though the Ogre is much better in terms of individual card ability. But that's the way it is. And I also put synergistic cards at the bottom. We talked about this a little bit in the last video, where Mad Scientist, you want to pick it after you've picked secrets already, because you don't want to pick secrets to cater to the Mad Scientist. You just want the Mad Scientist to suit the secret once you get there, because it forces you to bottleneck yourself into picking cards that might not be as good in the particular situation. But towards the end, you'll understand how many mechs you have, how many beasts you have, how many high cost, low cost cards, and you can start to pick around with synergy, and see, like, you may pick up the later Tinkertown Technician, which is obviously the 3-mana 3/3. If you have a mech on the board, gain +1/+1 and add a spare part to your hand, which is fantastic if you can get the mech. If you can, it's mediocre at best. But if you have gone through your draft and you're noticing you've picked up a lot of mechs, maybe you can start to add in the synergistic mech cards and start to create a deck that goes together better with each other. There's not a lot to really talk about here. I'm going to go through each style of the game, about the approximate amount of cards you want to have, and kind of give you some general ideas. This is something that we're going to talk about more, and it's a very important topic, so I didn't want to leave it out completely, but it's also really important to understand all of the cards before we get there. And like I said, towards the end of the series, we'll go through an arena draft. We'll talk about each pick. We'll try to agree on the cards that we are going to select. So, early game. In the early game, your objective is to establish board control. And once you establish board control, you can start to take the lead, and then you can eventually start to overtake the game. Early game is the cards I'm talking about that cost between 0 and 2 mana. Some people may consider early game to be cards that cost between 0 and 3, but I'm going with 0 for 2, 0, 2, 2. And you want between 6 to 10 of these cards. And when I say 6 to 10 of these cards, I'm talking about 6 to 10 cards that you want to play on turn 2. So I'm trying to think of an example off the top of my head. Maybe like Deadly Poison, which is a rogue spell. That's not exactly, even though it costs 1 mana, that doesn't count as an early game card because you don't play it on turn 1 because you have the 1 mana. I'm trying to think of another example, but I can't exactly. Maybe this is not an early game card, but you'll understand what I mean. Aldor Peacekeeper. It's a 3 mana 3/3 battle cry. Change the attack of one of your opponent's minions, or a minion, to 1. And that's a card that, even though it's a mid-game card because it costs 3 mana, you don't want to play it on turn 3. You want to keep it for the value that it has in another turn. Another example now that I'm thinking of is Humility, which is the 1 mana spell for Paladin. You don't want to use that on turn 1, ever. So when I say 6 to 10, I mean 6 to 10 cards you want to play on turn 2. And I also put at the bottom, not necessarily the most important thing, but Warlock synergy with your hero power. You can draft a more aggressive curve because you'll be able to refresh your hand all the time by using life tap. The Zoo style of Warlock is actually quite strong in Arena. It was one of my earliest, it's one of my earliest arenas that went really well. I think I got 8 wins when I was really new to the game. Alright, in the mid-game, the idea is to press your advantage. If you've established board control, the goal is to press your advantage. If you have lost the board control game, your mid-game cards want to 2 for 1, or maybe even 3 for 1. And when I say 2 for 1 or 3 for 1, I mean kill 2 or 3 of your opponent's early game minions so that you can start to claw your way back into the game. These cards are the ones that cost 3 to 5 mana. And the idea of the mid game is it's very dependent on the class you play. One thing I was thinking of when I was making this slide is that the Paladins, they have Hammer of Wrath, they have Consecration, and they have Blessing of Kings. Which are 3 very important, very powerful Paladin spells that are all 4 mana. So 4 mana is Paladin's kind of big turn. They have a whole bunch of different resources at their disposal, generally. So it's dependent on the class how you handle your mid-game, but your mid-game is very important. That's where you got your Chillwind Yetis, that's where you got your Sludge Belchers, you've got your Fen Creepers, you've got your Silverhand Knights. These are the cards that are more sticky than traditional cards, and you want to use them, especially if you're winning, to force out your removal, force out your enemy's removal. So let's say you play a Fen Creeper and your opponent uses a Fireball, and the next turn you've got an Ogre coming. That's perfect because your opponent used the Fireball on something that wasn't the ideal target, or the wastes a Polymorph, or something of the like. And you want 10 to 15. It's very dependent on your curve. If you don't have a lot of late game, then you want more towards the end of your mid game. You want more 5-cost cards. You want more 4-cost cards. It's nothing that I can say for sure. That's why we have ranges under the ideal category. And even if you fulfill these exact requirements, you get into the ideal category with each single one of your cards, you may not have a very good deck. And it's just there's so many variables and there's so many things that are different that it's hard to directly say that 10 to 15 cards is what you want for your mid game. But it's a general idea. And in the late game, you want to be sealing the deal. So this is cards that cost 6 or more, and 4 to 6 might be a little under for an estimate, but the problem with having late game cards in your hand is you can't play them for so many turns. You want to be able to draw them to get them later in the game, but you don't want them in your mulligan. You don't want to draw them on turn 1, 2, or 3 because it's just something in your hand that's going to be completely dead. And so that's why you generally want less of them, because too much big stuff floods your hand, and if you have nothing to do for a couple turns, then you lose the game, really. Your opponent starts to run away with it, and there will be some times where you're able to recover, but not always. And my final slide is exactly what I talked about before. You have to use your judgment. Arena is not black and white. I'm trying to make it as black and white as possible to try to understand some straight up value, some straight up analysis of cards, but ultimately it's your judgment, and you have to understand your curve, and it's fine to take a really long time to think about the card that you select. One of the three cards. One of the three cards, obviously, you pick. You have to understand how you want to play out the deck that you've crafted, and what card would be best for that deck. Or if if a deck is too skewed to one way, for example, it's got way too much early game, and then you may want to pick a heavier card to offset, or you can also, as I said before about synergistic cards, you got a really low curve, and all of a sudden you pick up a Sea Giant, and that's fantastic, and that's like a very synergistic combo that you have. So I hope this video was, well, first off, it's much shorter than the other videos, which is good, but I want people to understand that you don't want to just pick the best cards, but at the same time, you need to understand your deck, and you need to understand what's going on to really evaluate the scene that's going on, and so that you can ultimately make the best decision regarding your arena draft. And there will be some decisions that are right either way. It just depends on how you want to play it and your play style, and ultimately that's down to you. And that's what makes Arena unique. That's why there's Hearthstone professionals. The game's not RNG entirely. It's the people who can play and understand these cards and understand and use their judgment the best. The popular streamers, Crip, for example, that used to play Arena all the time, that were kind of Arena gods, because they understand what to do with the cards that they have. So, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you understand that you can't just watch these videos to be good. You gotta understand about Arena, and you have to understand the whole driving principles behind it. And I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you back here for part 5 later.